Hello and welcome to this special edition of Spectator TV. I'm your host today, Cindy Yu, I'm the broadcast editor, and I'm joined by James Forsyth, our political editor, and Fraser, the Spectator's editor. Now, we were expecting the Wakefield and Tiverton and Honiton by-elections to be lost by the Conservatives, but I think nobody quite expected by how much. James, what we saw was a collapse of the Lib Dem vote in one constituency in support of Labour, and the reverse in another one. So, are we seeing a return of tactical voting?
I think the big worry for the Tories looking at last night's results is that we appear to be heading back to a kind of 1997 style situation where politics is divided into Tories and anti-Tories. And the anti-Tories are prepared to vote tactically to unseat the Tory. Look at Tiverton. In 2017 and 2019, Labour came second in that seat. Last night they lost their deposit. Now that's not because people in that part of Devon are particularly unpersuaded by Keir Starmer. It is because voters in Tiverton looked at it and thought, right, well, the Lib Dems could beat the Tories here, even though they were third last time. Labour can't, and so they moved en masse to the Liberal Democrats. And the worry for the Tories is, and in Wakefield you saw tactical, a smaller version of this, where the Lib Dem vote, albeit from a small base, halved. They lost their deposit and Labour won. And I think the worry for the Tories is that if you look at the polls and you add together Labour, the Lib Dems and the Green, in crude terms, that anti-Tory bloc is about 60%. If they start voting tactically, and in the vast majority of seats, it is obvious who you should vote to try and unseat the Tory, then that could be absolutely devastating for the Tory party. And I think one of the biggest questions for them going forward now is how do you defang tactical voting?
Well, Fraser, is it all about Boris Johnson? Is that what is fanging this collaboration going on? If he left, would this tactical voting continue?
I'm afraid I think it would. I mean, yes, Boris Johnson his negatives now quite strong. If you look at on the Spectator Data Hub, we're tracking his unpopularity, and it's now pretty much down there with Tony Blair, just Nadir, even Theresa May. But if you take away Boris Johnson, are people going to be enthralled with the Conservative Party right now? I'm not sure that they will. They're going to think of a party that promised a manifesto pledge not to cut tax, not to increase taxes, but that's exactly what they've done. A party that's brought a runaway inflation, and combined with the strike chaos, you get a general sense of Tory chaos. Not Boris Johnson chaos, but Tory chaos. Now, this is why Boris Johnson is still in place. Nobody doubts that he has become a sort of lightning conductor right now. And as James says, that's why you see an anti-Tory vote. If you're Keir Starmer, you'd be absolutely distraught. You got 4% of the vote in Tiverton. I mean, that is not a great endorsement, way lower than Labour normally gets, but it's tactical voting. But when you look at the people most likely to succeed Boris Johnson, you still don't have a very attractive list. Right now you've got Jeremy Hunt still easily the favourite to succeed. Now, how many people think that Jeremy Hunt is the answer to the problems right now? But after Jeremy Hunt, you've got Tom Tugendhat, Penny Mordaunt, Liz Truss. When the Conservatives start to think about those four, they think, can we be sure they would be so much better than Boris Johnson to be worth the drama of deposing a sitting Prime Minister? So until there is a clear alternative, you're going to end up in this limbo. But I don't think we're looking at a limbo where the Tories tread water. They seem to be going down quite a lot, with various sort of panicked policies. James today writes about this, how they're planning to make it easier to outlaw Airbnbs in certain parts of England. You know, the Tories used to be all against these kind of policies. Now they're panicked, they're flailing, and it's very hard to say what the Conservatives stand for. So I think, yes, Boris Johnson's a problem, but a lack of any idea of what the Conservatives stand for, that's another problem.
James, for one person for whom Boris Johnson is a problem is Oliver Dowden, the party chairman, or former party chairman, I should say, because he resigned, as soon as these results came out. Tell us about this intriguing resignation letter that he wrote.
So Oliver Dowden is the party chairman and a party loyalist. He used to work for David Cameron. He's prepared, umpteen Tory leaders for Prime Minister's questions. And in 2019, he was one of three people, along with Robert Jenrick and Rishi Sunak, to write a piece saying, look, the Tory party is in a hole, and the only person who can get it out of that hole is Boris Johnson. And that was seen by many people as a sign that, people should put their doubts aside for the good of the Tory party. The only person who could get them out of a Brexit hole they dug themselves into was Boris Johnson. So turn to him and take the risk. And I think what's striking about this letter is he says someone must take responsibility. It can't be business as usual. Now, the responsibility line is interesting because when you lose a by-election in one of the safest Tory seats in the country on an almost 30% swing, you can't say that that is about the micro details of a campaign, that if you put the leaflets out in a different order, that would have made the difference. So that begs the question of why he is taking responsibility when it's clearly not a kind of tactical campaigning issue. And then I thought what was very interesting was his last line is, "I will, as always, remain loyal to the Conservative Party." And this is so striking because there is no line in there saying that he remains loyal to Boris Johnson, that he continues to support Boris Johnson as leader, but he will support Boris Johnson as leader from the backbenches. And what I think Oliver Dowden is saying in a kind of coded way is he now thinks that his loyalty to the Conservative Party and his loyalty to Boris Johnson's leadership are in conflict. And so he has resigned.
Because Fraser, for all of the policy issues, the macro issues that you're mentioning, the cost of living crisis, inflation, all of these things, you're right to say that these are things that people are unhappy about. But fundamentally, it's also about Boris Johnson's prosperity issue. It's about Partygate, the way he handled it. This weird Times story about potentially giving his wife Carrie a job in government. All these ideas that combine to make it seem as if the government doesn't play by the same rules under Boris Johnson. Presumably Tory MPs feel the same way and want to, have someone new, even if the choices are not amazing.
Yes, of course, this really annoys Tory MPs, but also by the time the next general election comes, I suspect Partygate will not be that big a factor. The biggest factor are people's salaries will be going down in real terms by 5 or 10%, and they'll be asking, does this government have any plans to get us out of this mess? I think that will quickly become the bigger and far more substantial issue. And if the government has no plans other than trying to ape Labour policies, then why not go with Keir Starmer? I was talking to a senior Conservative this morning. He was saying that right now, the Blair government was actually more reliable, in many ways better than this Conservative government. At least it was predictable. This Tory government is not predictable, whereas you're seeing the windfall taxes that they used to be against. There's talk of steel tariffs being slapped down as well next week in another panicked response. So when you see a Tory party which is weak and panicked, this is the opposite of the Tory party, which might be penalised for having a strong agenda people might disagree with. This looks like a party that's falling apart. So I do think these problems are going to get worse. And this is why I think, no matter how bad things look for the Conservatives, I think they can get significantly worse, because I can easily foresee Boris Johnson being replaced by a new leader who's got even less of a clue than Boris Johnson himself.
James, on the Spectator Data Hub, we have a poll tracker which shows that there's a 7% lead for Labour at the moment. Should we be expecting a bigger lead, essentially, at this point in time?
Yeah, I think what is quite clear from these results is that Labour's result in Wakefield was good but not spectacular. And I think when you combine the two results and the polls, there's more of an anti-Tory vote out there than there is a pro-Labour or pro-Starmer vote. I still think that the most likely result of the next election is an anti-Tory majority in the next Parliament. And I think in some ways, Starmer is still in that situation. Keir Starmer would still end up as Prime Minister. Now he would not, and so we should keep in perspective how it is. Now I think it is quite clear that things that would not improve the Tory party's mood would be if Keir Starmer ended up being pushed out and there was a Labour leadership election. I was talking to one Tory minister yesterday who said to me that he'd heard a rumour that the Durham police decision was coming tomorrow. And he looked kind of panicked about it, not kind of gleefully rubbing his hands. Oh, Labour will have to have a leadership contest. It's like, oh crikey, we could end up having to face Lisa Nandy, and that would be more difficult for us. And I think that the problem is that on the Labour side, the alternatives to Keir Starmer, Lisa Nandy, Wes Streeting are seen as being more electorally appealing than he is. I think the problem on the Tory side for Boris Johnson is this: he is still the biggest figure in British politics. He still dominates. But the problem at the moment is his dominance is now harming him. I was very struck talking to one cabinet minister who is loyal to him. He said to me after a by-election visit that what worried him, and this is someone who's been loyal to Boris Johnson for a very long time, is that Boris Johnson at the moment is motivating the anti-Tory vote more than the Tory vote. And so these people are kind of, want to get up in the morning and go and give him a kick, whereas the Tory vote doesn't necessarily want to come out and support him. And I think that is difficult. And then I think to Fraser's point, I mean, one of the things that is causing Tory worry is governments are generally unpopular in midterm, and it is true that this government is not spectacularly unpopular for a midterm government. But often when governments are unpopular in midterm, they're unpopular in midterm because they are doing something tough but necessary. So the coalition went through a period of unpopularity because it tried to restrain public spending, and their people didn't like that. Now, Tory MPs kind of understood why they were unpopular. At the moment, Tory MPs know that they're unpopular, but they don't understand the kind of what they are getting out of the unpopularity, if you see what I mean. You know, they're not getting a kind of smaller state out of being unpopular. They're not taking the toughest of decisions, and so I think that this unpopularity, you know, irritates them for that reason. They can't see the point of it.
Absolutely. And Fraser, just finally, let's talk about the Tory party. What are you hearing? How are people feeling about this? In particular, as Boris Johnson is away out of the country and will be for over more than a week.
Well, the main discussion is when to make a second attempt at trying to depose him. And there is a consensus amongst the rebels. I think they're quite right in this, and realising they cannot afford to botch it a second time. They can, as James was saying in a cover story a couple of weeks ago, change the rules to have another go. Technically, we're not allowed to for another year, but they can change the rules and do that. But if they were to do that and fail, then it would be Graham Brady who has to resign, the chair of the 1922 committee, as opposed to Boris Johnson. So they would have to be 100% sure that they would have the numbers to get rid of Boris, and there would have to be a far clearer idea about what should follow. Right now it's just a bit of a mush. They know they don't like the situation A, but they can't really agree on what situation B should be. So they need to start discussing, not necessarily who's going to be the next leader, but what sort of policies do they want? Do they want to, should they be going to the left or to the right? Should they be trying to copy Labour policies and deal with Labour that way, or trying to make a better case for Conservative questions? I mean, in a way, Boris Johnson's actually a distraction from the far more important question, how would you do it differently? If there is no real consensus on that question, then they are stuck to remain in this kind of purgatory. One of the very interesting points James makes in his analysis this morning is that what James calls the coalition of the left, the Labour, Lib Dems, the SNP, are on about 60% of the vote right now. So sure, you say the Labour is only 7 points ahead, but it doesn't look like very much. But when you look at these parties aligned together, because what we've seen in this by-election is this is now effectively what the Tories are up against. It's not Labour, it is whatever anti-Tory forces there are. And in which case, if the coalition of the left is at 60% and the Tories are far less than that, then there is a problem. And I think for when it comes to the next election, that is perhaps now the graph to watch. And the problem is that the Conservative Party, they know somebody needs to find an answer to this, but they're not sure who, and they've got even less idea of what that answer should be.
Well, James and Fraser, thank you very much. And you can be sure that Spectator TV and The Spectator will be here when we try to find the answer to that question. Thanks for watching.